Hello and welcome to Remember the Film, where this week we're talking about a hyper-violent cyberpunk movie, and you might be surprised to hear I didn't pick it. So I'm Hugo. With me are my usual co-hosts Jeff, Grizz, and Josh Bradley.
Hello.
How you guys
Hello.
doing? And we have a guest this week, as you might be seeing if you're watching the video version. How do I introduce this crazy man? He's the host of Large Popcorn, a podcast that we love and that we've been on. You can find him on Twitch because he's the #1 Metal Gear Solid streamer now. Cristian Macias.
Woo! Buonasera, Hugo. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you guys for having me here. Legit, okay, I want to say that I look up to you guys as movie podcasters. Like, I love hearing you guys' opinions. All three of you guys come across as very smart, and I was like a little intimidated when I got invited, so just putting that out there, but I'm happy to be on.
Well, that is very kind of you to include me with Hugo and Josh in sounding smart.
Let me put your mind at ease and say we are not smart, so don't you worry about a thing.
Okay.
The only reason we sound so smart on the podcast is because Josh is good at editing. That's the one thing that makes us sound.
He edits out all the really stupid stuff we say.
Oh yeah, like if you were to hear, if you're watching live on Twitch right now, this is, there's going to be some bullshit. Anyway, this week we're talking about DREDD. It's our film to remember for this week. Cristian picked it. We're going to get into the movie in a second, but before we do that, I proposed to the class, to the room, to introduce like a new segment that we'd do at the beginning of each show, where we just go around the table. I mean, virtual table, I guess, and talk about what we've been watching this week, what movies we've been getting into, going back, new releases, or wherever it is. So, very quickly, what we watched this week and brief thoughts about them. Shall we start with Cristian, since he's our guest?
Oh, well, thank you. I can be pretty quickly. I've been focusing on new releases this week. I'm doing 2 podcasts, so I've had to focus on one, Chloe Zhao's Eternals, which I think is very good and deserves more praise. I think that filmmaking is absolutely phenomenal. I think it's a very unique and fresh entry in the MCU. Of course, it's a little messy. I actually didn't enjoy the first hour very much, but I think once I start to care about the characters, like I really care by the end of the movie. So I loved it. Not quite top 10, but still pretty high. And then, of course, Edgar Wright's Last Night in Soho, who Hugo loves to cyberbully me on letterboxd about that movie, but I actually really loved. I think it's one of my favorite Edgar Wright movies, just because I think like I said on LB, the introduction of more dramatic elements in that movie I thought was like fantastic. I loved taking like the lens of telling Hugo last night on Facebook Messenger, taking the lens of like identity crisis and kind of imposter syndrome and having that be a little bit in the background there with Thomasin McKenzie's character. I thought was like fantastic and I want more of. So Hugo, that is what I meant by I want Edgar Wright to do more drama movies, but you get it. Yeah.
I get it.
So those 2.
Okay, Josh, Grizz, what have you guys been watching?
I also watched Last Night in Soho recently, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. And I'm not a horror guy, so like I was literally the only reason I was going to see it was because of how much I enjoy Edgar Wright. So I persevered, and I'm really glad I did. I enjoyed it quite a lot. And then I also watched the My Hero Academia movie, the 3rd My Hero Academia movie. I watched that last night. It is.
Did you watch the show?
Yeah, I love the show.
Oh,
I also read the manga. I'm all in on My Hero Academia. And the movie was good. It wasn't as good as the previous 2 My Hero movies, but I enjoyed it still. And then, of course, for our podcast here, we watched DREDD, and I watched Judge Dredd, the 1995 movie. And boy, I have some regrets regarding that last one. But we'll talk about that later. What did you watch, Josh?
So we haven't recorded in like 2 weeks, right? Because I'm looking at my letterbox and like the stuff that I've watched since we've last talked is a lot. New movies, I saw The Last Duel, I saw Dune, I saw French Dispatch, and I saw Last Night in Soho. Non-new movies, I caught up on Training Day and Midnight Run, neither of which I'd ever seen before, both of which were excellent. The Last Duel is the best movie I've seen so far this year, by like a good margin, I think. Go see it. No one saw it. I don't know if it's even in theaters anymore, but if it's still,
I saw it. I enjoyed it quite a lot. I don't think I loved it as much as Josh does, obviously, but I did really, really enjoy it.
Thoroughly enjoyed it. Dune rules. Excited for part 2. French Dispatch and Last Night in Soho both rule. Great movies all around. Christian, I really liked what you said about Last Night in Soho. I think it's really smart. Also, speaking of stuff that Edgar Wright hasn't really done before, movie about a woman. Hasn't really done that before. And it's great.
Yeah.
And also, shout out to co-writer Christy Wilson-Cairns. She's awesome too.
And I did have some doubts that maybe him doing a movie about a woman could, especially considering the subject matter the movie goes into, could work. But I think they handle it really well. So yeah,
well, like Josh alluded to, I think it helps that he wasn't the only writer on the movie.
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah.
I watched Last Night in Soho as well last night. So I'm very sleepy actually because it as I told you guys in private messages, the only way for me to see it in English was I had to go to a midnight screening, and it was on the other side of town, so I got home at like 3 a.m. But it was great. For some reason, Edgar Wright recorded like a little intro to the movie specifically for the theater where I saw it. I don't know why. There must be some history there, because it might be a theater that has something to do with classic giallo movies from Italy. I don't know. But it was fun. I really liked the movie. It's not my favorite Edgar Wright movie just because I love the Cornetto trilogy so much, but I liked it a lot. I also saw, I saw Eternals again the other day, and I also saw Deep Red, or Profondo Rosso, which is Dario Argento's classic sort of... I wouldn't call it a slasher movie. It's not necessarily a slasher movie, but it's sort of a horror thriller from the 70s. Great movie, very much an inspiration for Last Night in Soho, and I really suggest people see that because I think it's one of those Italian movies that I feel could have more recognition.
Deserves more than it's got.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but
nope.
I haven't.
It's a horror movie. One, so no, I probably haven't seen it.
Yeah,
Two,
it's a horror movie. It's a horror movie by 70s standards, but if you see it, it's more of a thriller.
Okay.
But I think like the direction is so good, and some of the way they move the camera and the music especially are just incredible. I really think it's a movie that deserves to be seen. And also one of Edgar Wright's favorite movies. Yeah, Christian.
I wanted to ask how that compared to Suspiria, because I really love
totally
Suspiria.
Different. Suspiria is very much completely a supernatural movie, and Deep Profondo Rosso is more a thriller. It's much more grounded. Even though, I mean, there's some similarities. Goblin is this Italian band from the 70s that did the score for most of the movies that Argento did in the 70s and 80s. And you can tell how the music in Suspiria is so amazing and gives you that sense of dread. This does the same, and yeah, it's really great.
Sense of dread.
Haha, there you go. That's a good segue. So anyway, this week, let's get into our film to remember for this week, which is DREDD. Before we get into our discussion, let's get some boilerplate stuff out of the way. The movie was released in 2012. It was directed by Pete Travis. It is easily his most well-known film. I would say the best as well, looking at the other filmography. I hadn't heard about any of the other ones.
I remember Vantage Point.
Yeah? Was it good?
Yeah, I remember. I did not see it. I just remember seeing ads for it a lot.
I was going to say the same thing, Josh. I remember seeing the ads for that one. Did not see it.
But maybe more importantly, it was written by Alex Garland, who, if you're a sci-fi fan in the last 10 years, he's emerging as one of the most well-known sci-fi writers and directors. He's done other movies like Ex Machina, Annihilation. He wrote Sunshine. He worked. I think he directed Devs as well, which I still haven't seen.
Yes,
very good. He also wrote 28 Days Later.
28 Days Later.
28 Days Later. Yeah, absolutely.
Real quick, I didn't know that Alex Garland wrote this, and so I didn't know that till the end credits rolled up. And so I finished the movie. I'm like, oh, that's actually pretty good. Then it said screenplay by Alex Garland. And I was like, holy shit, that's why. Yeah, that must have been why it was so good.
I also just saw that
more importantly,
he's currently working on writing an adaptation of the Halo video game.
I think he wrote that like 15 years ago.
Really?
And that it went to turn around like 15 years ago. Yeah.
Oh, well then they should probably go ahead and remove it from his letterboxd because it did not get made.
Maybe they're bringing it back. I don't know.
Yeah, there's no date on it on the letterboxd.
Apparently, Garland was very much a presence on the set of the movie, as well as being a writer and producer. And I think Urban has said in interviews that he turned to him for direction. So it's almost as if he was sort of a co-director on this, or at least it was a big presence.
A ghost director, as they say.
Yeah. And it's interesting that only a few years later he would debut with directing his first movie, right? Because I think Ex Machina is 2014, if I'm not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think it was.
So that was technically his directorial debut.
2015.
Well, it depends on which country you're talking about, I think, but
Right.
Ex Machina fucking
still,
rules.
God, that movie's good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good.
2014 on LB.
Yeah. Anyway, DREDD was a bit of a, well, not a bit, quite a big, box office flop. It only made 41 million worldwide on a reported 45 million budget, which doesn't include, marketing and all that stuff. So that's not great. But it's sort of a movie that found an audience afterwards, and it's kind of considered a sci-fi cult classic. Well, modern sci-fi cult classic in recent years.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah, it's based on the character of Judge Dredd. It's not the first adaptation, but it's definitely the better adaptation. We'll get into that. Which is a character that was featured in the British comic magazine 2000 AD, which is sort of it was a comic strip originally. Like, the magazine was sort of collecting different sci-fi stories from British comic book writers. And this is one of those. So, yeah, interesting. To jump into our discussion, let's just get the premise of the movie out of the way. The movie is set in a post-apocalyptic wasteland future where 800 million people live in Megacity 1, which is a lawless city where judges, which our protagonists are tasked to fight crime and deliver judgment directly on the street, although they're only able to respond to only 6% of all the calls, as they say in the movie. Judge Dredd, played by Urban, and Rookie Anderson, investigate a homicide on a 200-story megatower called Peachtrees that has 75,000 people living in it. Their investigation pits them against Mama, who's a gang leader and drug lord that controls the tower. And basically what happens is they go to investigate this homicide. She locks them in because she doesn't want her big sort of drug ring to be discovered or stopped. And the rest of the movie sort of turns into The Raid. I don't know if you guys have seen The Raid.
Yes.
But it's essentially them fighting through this whole building until they get to Mama and try to take her out. So let's start with our general thoughts. Cristian, you're the guest. Why did you choose this movie, and what do you think about it?
Yeah, I remember when Hugo approached me on coming on the show. I was, the conceit of the show is to pick movies that are kind of widely known but lesser talked about, right? And so I kind of had like a working list of movies I thought could kind of fit the bill, and then I checked everyone's LBs, and I noticed that some of the ones that I wanted to talk about, the majority had seen already. So I was like, well, I want to pick a movie that like I think none of you have seen, or maybe at least just one of you guys have seen, and so DREDD fit the bill for that. And luckily for me, DREDD is like a site for like 2012 and 2013. It was kind of like my film awakening. Like, that's when I really got into like movie watching and started getting more serious about it. And not Judge Dredd. I'm sorry. No, not Judge Dredd. Yeah, DREDD was like a site for me to really get into more movies, and I credit that to my cousin who introduced this to me because he really liked it at the theater. I watched it at his house, and like I instantly fell in love. Those aesthetics, obviously, like sci-fi, cyberpunk, dystopia. If you know me, I got my grad school, my master's in dystopian literature. So like this was very much up my alley, and this is what I considered like my introduction of like framework to that, right? And then I just think it's like the hyper stylization of it is really cool. Yes, Jeff.
Is there a lot of money in dystopian literatures?
No, that's why I have a lot of debt. I'm living in a one bedroom, but that's how it goes, Jeff.
That's awesome.
Welcome to the arts and literature in the U.S.
That's really cool, though. That's like what a unique thing to
really
get a master's degree in. And then you were talking about how you're not going to sound smart on this. It's like you literally studied this crap.
I have to apologize to Jackson because I always have to apologize for being pretentious because it comes out. But yeah, I think it's a really cool movie. It, like Jeff had said in his LB review, that it probably needs more substance. Like I agree. Like there needs to be more criticism there. But what is there is just like a really good time for me. And that's enough, I think. Also, I had a mad crush on Olivia Thirlby, and I just had to put that out there.
Call him. If you ever see this, Olivia, hit up Christian.
Please.
You guys, it's the first time you saw this movie, right? Because I'd seen it before.
Correct.
Right, so give me your thoughts. What do you think?
I did really enjoy it. As Christian has alluded to, I thought it was lacking a little bit in the world building, which, and ironically, in comparison to the 1995, it even is lacking in world building. And that's saying something because the 95 Judge Dredd is pretty awful. But I did really enjoy the aesthetic of this movie. And I think that's the most important part of it. And I believe I saw it in Christian's letterboxd review. There's the vibe that you get. This movie's all about the vibes, and that is something that really carries through the entire film, and makes it an enjoyable experience, even if you don't have any prior knowledge of Judge Dredd. If you've never seen the other movies, if you don't know anything about the world, you can still enjoy this movie fully because the movie's about the vibe of this self-contained story regarding the slow-mo drug and the raid style battle through the building. So yeah, I thought it was very, very fun.
I agree. Yeah, I think this movie is great. I'd heard it was great when it came out, and I guess in the year shortly after, but I never caught it. Christian, makes perfect sense to me that if you were kind of coming of age movie wise when this came out, that this one became one that you would flock to. I probably would have been the same way had this came out in, like, I don't know, 2007, 2008 timeframe. I agree with Grizz, but also disagree in that the 95 Stallone version has more world building, but I think to the detriment of the movie. I think it gets too mired down in, like, the system that they're depicting and the dystopia they're depicting, and, like, it's less interesting than just this movie, which is like a exceptionally hard day on the job kind of story, and like letting the futuristic aspect and like the tech aspect all kind of serve as background, and like not really get into the nitty gritty of it, just like, you know, plop these characters into a situation and let it play out.
I can agree with that.
It worked better for me, at least.
I think that there's probably a happy medium to find, at least like for me, with how much additional world building they could have done with this. Because at this one, it just kind of jumps right into, this is the world we're going. Yeah.
And I think there is some social commentary, and I mentioned it later in the outline, but it is a little slight in that it certainly has, it's ripe for more, and they don't take as many opportunities as they could have, I think. But I don't know. It's still really enjoyable. I think this movie was really good.
Yeah, I think I agree with Josh on this. I think the world building is actually my favorite part of the movie. The fact that it's such a contained setting, and it's a lean, 95 minutes, and I think you really understand the setting of this world through the very small chunk of it that you get to see. I love that about it. I think it manages to be so much while doing relatively little. The thing when on the outline I put something about social commentary just because I think it misses an opportunity to comment on the idea of the level of police state that this movie depicts. I feel like if this movie came out in 2021, it could still be 95 minutes, and it would be able to maybe, through the situations that our characters are put in, sort of maybe comment on that aspect of it a little more, which is something that cyberpunk media generally does. But apart from that, I think the movie is incredibly entertaining. I if you know me, I love movie violence. I love a cyberpunk movie. I love hyper stylization, and so I think it's a blast. Could it do with some more substance? Maybe, and maybe if there was an elegant way to put it in there, it could be even better than it is, but I still think it's really great, and it's a lot of fun, and I could watch this any day of the week, honestly. Like, I could watch this again tomorrow. That's
a fact. This is a movie you can come back to anytime and enjoy it just as much as the first time, and plus it's the kind of movie that if you were watching on TV, like a boomer like myself, this is a movie that if it was on TV, you could jump in the middle and enjoy the movie thoroughly the rest of the film. But you can't say that about everything.
Yeah.
What is TV? I've never heard of this.
I do. I do want to add. I wrote some notes here at the bottom that I think all you guys are right. Like it does need some kind of social commentary, as Hugo was saying. Everything like we're experiencing is through the lens of the judges, which by today's standards can be quite problematic. Which is why I think both Anderson and Dredd are kind of problematic faves of mine. Like I think they're really cool characters, even though they're probably not the greatest examples of people that I want to be protecting me. Maybe
Anderson's not bad.
In this dystopian. Right, we'll get into it though. I think she kind of not sacrifices isn't the right word, but kind of bends a bit of her ethics towards the like police state a little bit, and loses some kind of self identity. But that's debatable. We can talk about that later.
To some extent, it's true that the world that we're seeing is so far removed from just a normal society, and it's so broken that to some extent it's understandable how it would evolve in that direction. And you can see Dredd and Anderson still trying to use their judgment. I think the movie very much points to this, that they're trying to use their judgment and their powers that they're invested in by the city, not just to dispense judgment on anyone, but maybe to try and pick and choose their battles, and they're trying to maintain some sort of ethical standard that goes beyond just the letter of the law. You can see this at the beginning where Dredd is like, oh, there's this homeless person, but you're not allowed to stay here, but don't let me find you again. He's not necessarily just going in and killing everyone that's doing anything, even though he could. But it does give you an idea that if the judges are corrupt, then bad stuff might happen, even worse than what we see in the movie itself. So I don't know. Grizz, go ahead.
It's interesting. This may be a lesson that they learned from the 1995 Dredd or Judge Dredd, or maybe it's just a lesson they learned through time in reality. But in the 95 one, Judge Dredd is more like, if you have committed any crime, you are getting the harshest punishment you can possibly be given for that. And in that movie, it makes him a less likable character, in a lot of ways. So I think maybe if that is something they learned from that movie, great. Otherwise, I just like this characterization of Dredd much more. Even if I don't think this movie is as much about Dredd as it is about Anderson, it does make Dredd a more likable character in this one.
For sure. Okay, I'm interested to hear this. Guys, you should talk about the 95 Dredd for a minute and let me know.
I would love to.
Let's do it.
How it compares to this.
Go ahead, Josh.
Because I could not. I had a rough week. I could not be effed to watch the 95 Dredd. Not gonna lie.
Cristian, you haven't seen the 95 Dredd, is that right?
I've seen a few scenes based on the same cousin that watched Dredd. Showed me a little bit of Judge Dredd. Obviously, the stolen impression we did before the show, but other than that, no.
Which I will not do on Mike.
Nope, not gonna do that.
Well, first of all, I'm actually really glad I watched it, because it gave me. You don't need a ton of context to watch 2012 Dredd, but it gave me whatever context I may have needed. And I think I actually liked Dredd more having watched Judge Dredd, because once you've seen the bad version, you appreciate the good version, or at least the better version. And that's in regard to like the weaponry and like just the concept of the judges in this system. But so my take on the 95 Judge Dredd is that it is a early 1980s movie that somehow was released in 1995. And I mean that from the aesthetics to the lead character to the tone.
You cannot be more right about that, Josh.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought about this for a minute. The I think the production design is actually really cool in the 95 Judge Dredd, but like it's very clearly leaning heavily both in like the visuals and the style they're going for. It's leaning heavily on Blade Runner, which came out in 1982. It's leaning heavily on Escape from New York, which came out in 1981, and this came out in 1995. And like it has a beefy very, very muscular 80s action hero in the center of the movie. And again, it came out in 1995. Real quick, I wanted to share this from the Wikipedia page for the 2012 Dredd. The filmmakers decided that Dredd should appear lean and fast like a boxer rather than bulky like, quote, someone who spends hours sort of steroiding himself up. So I wonder who they're talking about there.
That's great.
But like, and the fact that the movie is like shit serious, and Rob Schneider is in it, and he's the only person who knows what movie he's in. So he was like my favorite part of the movie by a good margin, which probably isn't a great sign if my favorite part of your movie is Rob Schneider.
Well, and that's it's funny you say that. If you look at the reviews for the 95 Judge Dredd on Letterboxd, like user reviews, the vast majority of them are people talking about how much they hate Rob Schneider in this movie. And I'm with Josh. Like this movie was campy as all get out, and Rob Schneider fit that vibe. So I don't get why they were so mad about it, unless they were just diehard Dredd fans who were just really disappointed this is how the movie turned out.
Well, I don't know. It's campy to watch now, and so therefore, like the tone of Rob Schneider's performance fits how audiences watch it now. It may not fit how audiences were watching it in 1995, possibly. But that's what I mean is like he knows what movie he's in, or at least he knows what movie this would eventually become, and it focuses too much on Sly Stallone. Because it's a 90s movie and he was a major star, but like it's way less interesting for it, and I think that 2012 Dredd clearly learned from that. And we have a different POV character to like experience Dredd through, and it's a lot more interesting and palatable this way. What do you got, Grizz?
I did want to say another thing, that a lesson that was definitely learned from the 1995 Judge Dredd. In the 1995 film, Sly Stallone has his helmet off for the vast majority of the movie. He is almost not in his iconic costume for the entire movie. And people were really mad about that because, of course, in the comics, he never removes his helmet. To this day, even in modern-day adaptations of the Dredd comics, he has still not revealed his face in the comics. So people were really mad about that at the time. And then, as you see in the 2012 Dredd, helmet on the whole time.
Yeah, which is better. The other thing is, like, we kind of alluded to this, saying that, like, the 95 Dredd kind of got into, like, the mechanics of the system that's in place in this dystopia, and the 2012 version doesn't as much. The 95 version, really, like, the first half hour is kind of like a lot of exposition about like what this world is and what the role of the judges are. But beyond that, once it actually gets in the meat of the story, it's kind of just like a really tired, like, he's accused of something, he's got to clear his name, there's a long lost brother brought in that's the villain. Like, it's all like it's like, I told this to my wife, it's like an AI watched a bunch of 80s action movies and just spit out a 95-page script, and that's what it felt like, honestly. Like, it didn't really, like, the first half hour got into like who the Judge Dredd character is, but beyond that, you could have swapped it out for any stereotypical generic action movie beyond that. And so that's why I think, even though it doesn't get into the lore as much, I think the 2012 Dredd is like a better sense of the character for me, at least, just showing him in a tough day on the job.
Yeah,
I think, and we can jump into the characters now, I guess. I think Karl Urban in this movie is actually really good. He has to play this stoic character where he's not allowed to show his face ever, and I think he nails the tone that they're going for. Like, this character feels like he should be this way, even though I haven't read the comics. I don't know how he was supposed to be in the comics, but it fits this movie perfectly. And I think they do a really smart thing, even though it is a little convenient that Olivia Thirlby Anderson has these psychic powers, and that's why she can't...
Super convenient.
Yeah, that's why she can't put the helmet on. But, I mean, I think they do a really good job because they manage to pair him, who has to be stoic the whole time, even when he gets shot, with a character that you can empathize with. And it creates this really good dynamic where you experience the movie through her. And it sort of makes Dredd a better character, because I don't think he would be an interesting character if he was actually the protagonist of the movie. I don't think I feel the same.
100%, yeah, absolutely.
I other than it, feeling a little bit like I was expecting the movie to be more about Dredd. I don't think it's actually to the detriment of the movie at all that the perspective is through Anderson's perspective of Dredd, and I think that works really, really well for the narrative. What's up, Josh?
That's a good way. It's, you know, a tried and true way to do it is if you have like an odd world you have to introduce the audience to, give them someone who's experiencing the world for the first time so you can, you know, see it through her eyes. And that way it's a really convenient way to get exposition across, a convenient way to learn the ropes of what's going on. And, you know, it works here for sure.
So how do you feel about these characters overall? I think the movie is really good at being this hyper stylized action movie while also sort of keeping you grounded with these characters. I feel like the whole movie, they're basically in it the whole time. It doesn't really stray away. I think what you said about the 95 Dread, it sounds like there's a lot of time that is spent on things that don't have nothing to do with the characters themselves. And I think what this movie does so well is that through these characters, you understand the world. And if there's some details that aren't completely clear, it really doesn't matter. You sort of stick with them the whole time. And it just really works well for me that way.
I want to clarify a thought here. The world building in the 95 Dread was not great, but there was a lot of it, right? So I felt like you did get to see a lot of the world. My issue with the world building in this one is that we actually don't get to spend that much time in what I would describe as the actual world, since the whole movie is taking place in this one building, and the fact of the matter is this building is not too dissimilar to apartment complexes in reality, like as it is now. It doesn't make it feel like a dystopian future to me. It just feels like, you know, the Raid Redemption.
This is actually kind of where I disagree a little bit with Jeff, in that I think the location of Petrie's is like the site of implicit storytelling, where I think it's like indicative of the entirety of either the world or Mega City 1. So even though it's not like entirely explicit in world building, like you get like the Carl Urban's voiceover in the beginning, there's still pieces here and there of like what that kind of state looks like through the two judges moving up in peach trees. I don't think it's enough. So to Josh's, to Jeff's credit, but there's still a little bit there for me that there's enough for me to kind of try to analyze stuff here and there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty dystopian. Yes, this is an apartment building, and apartment buildings exist in the real world, but like to have it completely locked down such that no one can leave, and the entire apartment building is run by a bunch of murderous drug dealers. It's pretty dystopian.
So
I guess.
you haven't seen Raid Redemption, but that is
no.
You know, the plot of the movie is this building is run by a mob, and you know, and their base is on the top floor, and it's set in modern time. So like, because I've seen that film, I think it was really hard to think like this is the future, because it was so similar to a movie set in the present.
But is the mob headed by Cersei Lannister? That's the real question.
No.
Okay. So
no, you're right. You win.
God bless Lena Headey.
Which I to some extent I understand where Jeff is coming from. It doesn't look as futuristic as other movies. Like if your I don't know, if your example for a cyberpunk setting is Blade Runner, this doesn't look like that. It's sort of a lower level of sci-fi. I don't know if you understand what you mean, where it looks familiar enough, but then there's some elements that are very much futuristic.
Sure.
I think
called dirty sci-fi.
Dirty sci-fi.
There you go. That's what I was looking for. It's interesting that the cinematographer has said in an interview that him and the production design wanted to create an aesthetic that sort of fits somewhere in between Blade Runner and Clockwork Orange, which I thought was a really interesting thought, because it very much does feel that way, where, you know, A Clockwork Orange, if you go and see it now, it doesn't even seem necessarily that it's a sci-fi film, even though it technically is.
Absolutely right.
And Blade Runner is the example of the super futuristic mega metropolis that you get in movies. And I think it toes the line pretty well.
Maybe I just am not remembering it. What year is DREDD set?
I don't think they say. They only say it's the ashes of the old world.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. They said in the 95 Dread what it was. I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't think they say this in.
It doesn't say here. No.
And so maybe that's the other thing, is that, you know, I was anticipating, like Hugo saying, a more Blade Runner-esque future that feels in the far-flung future, even though we all know Blade Runner was set Like last
2019.
2019.
Yeah.
The original Judge Dredd takes place in the 2080s, so about 90 years in the future.
Yeah.
2787, am I right?
Yeah, so I might have been. It may be unfair that I was expecting a more high-minded sci-fi stuff than it was, and maybe on a rewatch I'll go in with a more accurate expectation, and it won't bug me.
That's I think it's interesting that how much into the genre of cyberpunk are we? Like, how much have we seen? Because could
you define cyberpunk for me before you do that?
Cyberpunk is a very difficult genre to define. It's sort of if you go look for a definition, the first thing you find is it's difficult to define. It's true. It generally means sort of a relatively near future where society to some extent has collapsed. Very often it's a police state. There's sort of some elements that feel like they're otherworldly, like they could be considered paranormal. Like we see psychic powers in this. Psychic powers are something that show up in cyberpunk media, for example, but they're usually explained either with body augmentation or with something drug related. A new drug has been created that has unlocked some potential of the human brain that we didn't know before. And generally, I think when Cristian says dirty sci-fi, I think that's a good way to understand what cyberpunk is. And it's sort of a genre where you know it when you see it.
Yes.
It's kind of not necessarily easy to define. Like, to distinguish what is cyberpunk and isn't cyberpunk within science fiction so easy, but you sort of know it when you see it.
What I always try to do when people have asked what is cyberpunk to me before, I always ask them, do they know what steampunk is? So, Josh, are you familiar with steampunk?
Kind of.
Okay.
Sort of.
Well, so yeah, I mean, cyberpunk is steampunk, but you replace all the steam and pipes with technology.
So how about this? When someone says steampunk, I just immediately think of Mad Max. And so when someone says cyberpunk, I just immediately think of The Matrix. Am I halfway there?
So The Matrix technically is sort of post cyberpunk. Yeah, it's complicated. But like, I do want. Sorry,
Christian's got something.
No, I do want to add that cyberpunk also like goes beyond just like the aesthetics that we see on screen or described in novels. Cyberpunk does try to say something. It does try to have some kind of criticism of societal world. So it does have that as well. But it's also, again, like the aesthetics that Hugo was describing.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about cyberpunk as a genre is that it isn't necessarily super high tech. Like, sometimes the level of advancement in technology isn't that advanced as we might expect from a Blade Runner. I don't know if you guys know about this movie Strange Days, which is a movie by Catherine Bigelow. It was also, I think, released in 1995, and it is considered a cyberpunk film, even though the technological advancement isn't as prevalent in the film. But the way the setting is presented and sort of the social commentary that the movie is going for makes it fit into the cyberpunk genre, even though it's very much low tech compared to other ones. DREDD is sort of an in-between. It doesn't feel as futuristic as Blade Runner, but I do think the design of the production design in this movie in general, I think, is really good and makes you get an idea of that world with all the technology, the weapons, the slow-mo drug that we haven't gotten to yet, and I think it's very good. So
the thing that maybe like to in an effort to answer Josh's question, what are some of the staples of cyberpunk? Like, body modification, a reliance on technology that has not resulted in the greater society that you would have anticipated.
Megacorporations.
Those are the sort of commentary things that a lot of the cyberpunk stuff brings up a lot. Is it's like you looking at a logical progression of American capitalism to its extreme end, and that's a lot of what the social commentary is for the cyberpunk genre.
Terminator.
Yeah, to some extent.
There's some, definitely.
Yeah, and AI is also an element that often is in cyberpunk. That's why I say the Matrix and Terminator sort of are post-Cyberpunk, because AI is generally something that is introduced in Cyberpunk, and then the Matrix and Terminator sort of explore the consequences.
I think with Terminator,
I'm getting really nerdy on this, but
the Terminator stuff.
I think it's an
the
interesting
stuff you see in the future of Terminator is the more cyberpunk stuff. So yeah, I mean, but yeah, so you've got a rough idea, Josh, of what qualifies as cyberpunk.
And I think this movie is really good at using the aesthetics and some of the themes of the genre. As we said, the social commentary maybe isn't quite there as much as other series, other movies, other literature as well. But yeah, I think the aesthetics are really cool. How do you guys, just on a filmmaking level, how did you guys feel about the slow-mo drug? Because like for me, the idea of it's so cool, and most of the sequences are fantastic where it slows down and we get these hyper stylized moments of just it's usually violence, but not always. I think the way they visualize is really cool. Some of the CGI sometimes is a little noticeable, whereas like, oh, I can tell this movie is a 40 million budget, but I still think it works overall. What do you guys think?
Okay, I can begin.
Yeah,
there you go.
I'm leaning more towards the camp that I kind of love the depiction of the slow-mo drug. Partly because I think the way they spend like actual time really trying to explain to the viewer like how the person taking the drug experiences time. And I think that's like the first homicide, I think, is the first time you actually see it, the triple homicide. And like it's fantastic because you feel like the time lapsing on their way down from, I think, one like the tallest story.
Yeah,
of course,
I think they say.
Yeah. 200 stories.
200. Of course, Hugo's right. It does look a little wonky, especially like in the ending. I think it looks a little weird, but I think it's mostly fine. But I think one of the biggest things that I love about the slow-mo drug is how they used to reinforce that aesthetic with the song that they used, which I wrote down in the notes. Paul Leonard Morgan used "You Smile" by Justin Bieber slowed down to, I think, 600% or 800%.
800%.
And it creates like this super ethereal kind of score, and I love pairing those two together. I think it's really cool.
I agree that the scene that you're talking about in particular is great, where you actually are. They don't just put you in the mindset of the person taking the drug. The camera is literally that person's point of view.
Yeah.
The point of view is the drug is put just below the camera, so it's going in your mouth, quote unquote, as the viewer, and then suddenly time slows to 100th time, and then you're thrown over a ledge and fall to your death. I think that's really effective. I thought the slow-mo scene where Dredd and Anderson go and bust in the drug house, and Dredd shoots like 4 or 5 dudes, one in the gut, couple in the face, in like extreme slow-mo. I thought that was excellent. And in terms of the budget, like it looks a little wonky, but also like these characters are high, so it's okay that it looks wonky. That's like a kind of a hand-wavy explanation for how it doesn't quite look right, but I don't know. It works in universe, so...
Did you guys feel like they overused it a little bit in the beginning of the movie? Because like you have it in the opening car chase, the guy is doing slow mo in the back of the car.
That's right.
Right at the beginning. Then you have Lena Headey doing
in a bathtub
in the bathtub,
Yeah,
which
just
looks
randomly in a bathtub.
really cool. Like the water splash effect looks, that looks really nice. But then you have throwing the people off the building. You have the shootout and that's all in the first third of the movie. So like I thought it was very cool, but I did feel like they were doing it a lot. I'm almost curious what the runtime of this movie would be if all the slow-mo was done in real time.
If I remember right, the scene in the car, it's not very. They don't stay on it very long.
No, it's not
maybe
long.
The Lena Headey. Yeah, maybe the one with Lena Headey in the bathtub, it goes on a bit too longer. I think the one they want to spend time on is the triple homicide slow-mo.
And that's the one that feels the most impactful to me, because like we talked about, that being in the point of view of the character, it actually adds a level of morbidness to this assassination. That I mean, after they were already skinned the guys, and now they're throwing them overboard. Man, that was twisted.
Rough day for those people.
And it's also like a tough balance to some extent, because you want to present this very strange concept and make it digestible for the audience, and make it very clear that it isn't just slow-mo because we're doing a cool slow-mo shot, but we're explaining what this drug does and how it feels and also how it feels to do it recreationally. I think the fact that they show other characters doing it is also just because they don't want the first time you see it to be when they kill someone and they use it sort of as a torture mechanism. it's a tough balance. I agree that maybe there's a few too many scenes, but I understand where they're coming from on that decision.
Yeah, I guess to Hugo's point, a defense of like the way they use it. The first time you see it, it's during a car chase, so like the audience might just think, oh, it's a car chase, it's hyper stylized, that's why time slowed down. And the next time you see it, it's Lena Headey using it recreationally. And then the next time you see it, it's being used as a torture device. So like that's and only after those 3 uses do you actually get an explanation verbally of what this drug is doing. I think from the cops afterwards.
Yeah.
And also real quick, I got to shout out. Are we in spoilers?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
I guess.
We're in spoilers.
So yeah.
Lena Headey's death, which is duplicating the triple murder in the first act, but like notably. When the 3 guys go over the balcony, like we're in their point of view as they go over the balcony and as they fall for a little bit, but then it cuts to the ground and we see them land at normal speed, which is really very gnarly scene also. But like Lena Headey, we actually see her land in super slow-mo, and the way they do that with like her face landing basically on the camera more or less in super slow-mo and then
becoming a Jackson Pollock
painting.
So gross, dude.
And
that was cool though, man.
Have you noticed that the blood forms the X that is the symbol of
on
the
the
judges?
masks? Yeah.
Yeah.
I do want to say that as much as I felt like they were overusing the slow-mo in the beginning, it does really build the vibe, as we talked about earlier, of this film. That they do carry it all the way through, and that ending, getting the juxtaposition of Lena Headey being thrown out the same way that she threw out those other 3 guys. Worked really well in the slow-mo for me.
It's like poetry, it rhymes. I'm sorry.
Can we double back and talk about some of the other characters?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Because I know Josh had mentioned he had some thoughts on Anderson's abilities in our notes. What did you think of Anderson's psychic abilities?
They're fine. They move the plot along, I guess, and they differentiate her from the other characters somewhat, and also give her a reason to be aesthetically distinct from the other judges, which is cool. But the fact that they kind of just like hand wave away the fact that mutants exist in this world, but most of them just have like 3 arms, no arms, and she gets like mind reading powers like that. I don't really need an explanation for that. It's just just something that I noted as convenient story wise, and I'm like, okay, that's fine. It didn't like. It wasn't until after I finished the movie that I started like think about it. I'm like, interesting.
Yeah.
But like while I was watching it, I guess while I was watching it, I thought I'd get more of an explanation for how she became like this, or like mutants or whatever. But
we didn't
I
get
don't know.
that.
It's not really needed. Yeah, I don't really need it though. It's only something as I'm like trying to like pick apart the movie. Did I realize? That was kind of
I think
convenient.
I enjoy the abilities. In fact, we'll get to it later. But one of my favorite scenes involves her abilities here. But it does, like you said, it is a little convenient. But it also they kind of choose when it works arbitrarily. And like there's a scene later in the movie where Wood Harris gets the drop on her. I'm like, no, she's a psychic. Like, there's no way he gets the drop on her.
Well, I think she has to like focus, right? I'm not sure.
But when they were riding the elevator, and she's not even looking at him, and he's like, "Oh, he's thinking about taking your gun," and
yeah, it
like,
could be that maybe at that time she's distressed because there's these 2 kids that are pointing guns at them, and maybe she's concentrated on them, and But I do feel like when she does use the powers prominently, she always says, "Oh, like." It's sort of implied that Dredd is going to cover her, and she's just leaning against the wall and closing her eyes and using the powers. And maybe in the elevator there was nothing else to worry about; she was more able to use the power. But I agree with Josh to some extent that it's sort of a plot mechanic that they need to tell the story that they want to tell. And I also feel like it just sort of kind of gives them an excuse to have some stylish, surreal sequences that I enjoy. So
yeah. As soon as we got to those sequences, it's like, oh, this is a Hugo-ass sequence right here.
If there's any criticism there, like I think to Blade Runner 2049, specifically 2049, when Kay goes back to the LAPD and somebody tells him F off, skin job, like there's like criticism there of how the world views the other. So I would say Anderson is the other in this movie, in this world. But the fact that they use it more as a plot device rather than just to do some kind of criticism about people who are different in this society, it really points to Jeff's point about how there's not enough kind of criticism there on how we view the others. It's more plot device, I agree. Yeah.
But
And then
I still think it's a fun plot device because
It is.
It
It's
also
super
Oh
allows
yeah.
her,
Yeah.
and it kind of allows her to be in the unique position to be a judge that also has more empathy for other people, and I do think it comes from the fact that she has the psychic power. But one of my favorite scenes of the movie that we'll talk about it, but it is when she decides to let Donald Gleason's character go, because she's seen the torture that he's been through. And, you know, maybe if she was just another judge, that, you know, she wouldn't know that. And maybe we'd have to get a scene where, he explains, I'm just here because they tortured me. And it could get a little melodramatic. And I don't know. I feel like, yeah, it is weird and sort of convenient, but the way they use it, I really enjoy in the movie. Even though it could get an additional explanation, but I don't know.
Donald Gleason's character, I kind of felt like maybe I wasn't paying enough attention, but when they reveal that he was the guy at the beginning, you know, getting his eyes pressed out, I was like, oh, that was him. I had not put that together at all. And then like all the times that she was like, you know, torturing him, you know, like I wasn't. I kind of felt like that was just their dynamic, and I wasn't like I didn't realize that it was supposed to indicate that he was not doing any of this willingly. Like I thought he was just like the sort of dynamic where it's like the underling who works for the boss willingly, but is afraid the boss will kill them if they screw up.
Right.
What did y'all think of that?
I love that they go back to that moment where she gauges his eyes out, because when they show it at the beginning, it's sort of just a random montage of all the violent stuff that she's done to these people. So you don't focus on any single one of those specifically. And the fact that they go back to that one, I think is really cool. It's a cool way to set it up. Cristian, go.
There's the eventual payoff, but I think Jeff is right in that I knew this movie, like I rewatched it for like the third or fourth time, and I still forgot that yes, like he is a victim of Lena Headey's character, and I totally forgot. And I don't think it's telegraphed that well that it's established that he is like forced to do this, that he doesn't really want to do it. But I mean, it like Hugo has mentioned, it is kind of cool to get like, oh right, like this is the guy. Like I don't know, I'm kind of in the middle here.
I think it hides in plain sight because, like, you do see, like, it does focus on his eyes, and, like, his eyes are clearly, like, mechanical in some way. Yeah. They're not completely organic. And, you know, there is obviously the scene where she holds a knife to his stomach, which was hard for me to watch as he has to lie to the police on the radio. I also think that was, Hugo, to your point, it's cool that, like, that montage of stuff that Ma did that was terrible, like, all of it kind of, like, comes back at some point because, like, Anderson uses it against Kay in his in like their mind game thing. I won't mention it here, but a thing mentioned about Ma and that montage is brought back there too. What I want to say about Donald Gleason's character though is like, but even before I knew this was written by Alex Garland, I was thinking as I was watching this that this is his character from Ex Machina in another life. Yeah, you know, just a different version of his Ex Machina character. And then hey, it was written by the same dude.
That's interesting. Yeah. So,
well, and ultimately, I'll say that it still worked for me. It left me feeling like maybe I hadn't paid enough attention, rather than maybe they didn't set it up enough. And plus, ultimately, all that matters is that we trust that Anderson's psychic abilities are accurate, and that when she reads that he's a victim, that is the truth. So it's not ultimately to the detriment of the film, but it could have been fleshed out a little better.
And I guess the only character that we haven't talked about is, well, we talked about Lena Headey to some extent, because Ma's character is sort of ever present in the movie, and she's just this ruthless, awful drug lord. But another character that is in the movie is Wood Harris as Kay, I guess he's called. I didn't know his name until I sort of went on the Wikipedia page, and he's one of Ma's gang members. And this is where I feel like the movie, if it was made today, would be a little different. Because, like, it's this police state, and we sort of spend an hour with these two hyper-powerful policemen bullying a person of color who is only evil in the movie. And it's kind of like, it's not a big deal, I feel like, in the movie, because it really doesn't focus on it in that sense, but it did feel a little weird with 2020 eyes. I don't know if you guys agree. Again, I don't think it's a big deal. I feel like the movie is going for like a very straightforward action film, and I feel like the style and setting of it are more important than necessarily what you might get from that.
This is why I call the judges my problematic faves. And that I think Wood Harris's character Kay needed some speaking lines like way earlier on. I needed a sense of who this character was beyond just the dude that helps
guy.
Mama kill people. Yeah, just bad guy. Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I mean, they need to have a lieutenant for Ma, but like someone who's high up enough that she cares about him speaking to the police, and like will go through this whole song and dance, like get him to not talk to the police, but also like. You can't blow the big bad in the first act, so it's got to be a happy medium of like someone who has power but isn't like the main villain, I guess.
I just want him to speak more because I really like him as an actor, and I don't think he's gotten enough opportunities to show this. He's Jules from Remember the Titans. He was so good in Remember the Titans, and I've never felt like he's gotten enough opportunities since then to showcase.
He's not, no. Absolutely not.
And so it is a little disappointing. Whenever I see him in a movie, I'm like, oh, maybe this is Wood Harris's time to shine, and then he just doesn't get it. And unfortunately, yeah, like you said, it does make them problematic with modern vision, and honestly, probably should have been problematic in 2012 when.
Let me say this to the younger audience: like we knew in 2012 that black people and the police had a strained relationship. Yeah, it wasn't like a new thing in the last few years.
Just learned. No. Just learned last year.
Absolutely, of course it wasn't. But I feel like the way media is sort of evolving to portray these dynamics has changed,
or at least be aware of them. Yeah.
To some extent, you know what I mean.
It's not like the movie was willfully. It's definitely not willfully doing anything negative in that sense. But it is something that you should be aware of.
They are equally as brutal to every criminal that is in the movie. It's not that he's singled out specifically or anything.
I guess what I'll say about the problematicness of the optics of that is like if the whole gang was like black men, that's one thing. But like it's a pretty racially diverse and gender diverse gang. So like I don't know. Yeah, to focus on the optics I guess could be a problem, but I think overall it's fine.
I agree.
I don't know.
Do we want to just quickly go through what happens in the ending, and then we can talk about the ending and some of our favorite scenes of the movie, so we have the full sort of idea of the story. So what happens is essentially that they start fighting through the building. Then at one point, as we have mentioned, Anderson is captured by Kay. Is his name? I'll never remember that.
Yes,
sure.
Yes,
we get it. He's captured by Mama's gang member, but she is able to eventually free herself in a really cool sequence that involves the gun that basically I think it's DNA coded. So one of the gang members tries to use it against him, and it backfires, and I think it explodes. DREDD fights his way through to the top of the building. And he sort of has this final showdown against some corrupt judges that Mama herself called and paid to sort of get rid of the good judges and hide everything that's been going on. But they eventually manage to kill them, and they finally reach Mama. And they have this really cool final scene where she uses a device that is tied, I think it's connected to her heartbeat, and if her heart stops, the whole building is rigged to explode. And DREDD sort of takes a big risk here.
The top 50 floors were rigged to explode.
Yes, the top 50 stories are rigged, but they will make the rest of the building
correct
collapse if they do go off, if the bomb does go off. But DREDD sort of takes a chance and says, what's the range on this thing? And he drugs her again, as we mentioned, and throws her off the building. And I think there's a really cool moment where he's looking down, and he's always still stoic, but you can sort of tell that he's sort of waiting and hoping that he's right, that his gamble wasn't a mistake, and the range on the thing isn't going to make the whole building explode. But yeah, he was lucky, I guess, in that, or at least to some extent. And then we get a final scene, sort of a little epilogue, where because Anderson was under DREDD's sort of examination throughout the movie, and if she passed, she would become officially a judge, and if she didn't pass, she wouldn't, and they would kick her out, I guess. And at the end, despite the fact that she didn't follow all the rules to the letter, DREDD tells the chief that she has passed the test. So DREDD sort of recognizes that Anderson using her empathy and sort of a moral compass is actually a good thing, even though she didn't follow all the regulation perfectly. And that's the whole story.
I think that actually is like a bit of social commentary in itself, the fact that he passes her,
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I would also point out is a break from the characterization of DREDD in the 1995 version as well.
100%. Yeah.
So
100%.
that's another reason why I just think it's so much better in this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if we're jumping into, as I said, let's talk about our favorite scenes. My favorite scene in the movie is when she's been sort of nervous throughout the whole movie, and slowly she's been building confidence. And at one point, she's completely confident, and she tells DREDD, "Yes, I'm going to let Domhnall Gleeson go because he's a victim. I don't care if it doesn't follow the regulation. I already failed because I think I lost my equipment.
Let them take my gun."
Yeah. And to her, I think that's the big scene where she's finally confident, has strength, and the fact that she wants to finish this and only cares about what's right and wrong and whether she becomes a judge doesn't matter to her anymore, I thought was really good. And I do think it's the strongest bit of social commentary in the movie.
I want to point to a different scene, Hugo, that it focuses on Anderson a lot, but really questions that idea of like more morally gray. There's the scene earlier, about halfway through, a little bit maybe after halfway through. Maybe it's a group of gang members, maybe it's a group of civilians that are held, obviously the civilians are held hostage in this peach trees, but there's a group of people who are going after the judges to stop them for Mama. And obviously the judges just wreck through everyone. And after, when they have to go into hiding because a group of people are going down a corridor, they go into someone's home. And Anderson looks on the table before they leave, and there's a picture of the two. Like, she's doing this because she wants to help her husband, who is out there looking for the judges. I just don't want him to die. Something along the lines of that. And on the table, that picture, you get a close-up of someone's face, and it's someone that Anderson had shot earlier. And that scene...
one person she shot.
Exactly. And that scene, when Anderson is just kind of focused on that, like the weight of her job is really waning on her, I think tells a lot about her character. The fact that she's having to sacrifice some sense of what she wanted to do as a judge and what the reality of the job actually is, I think is one of the most powerful scenes of the movie. There's some stuff I talked about, I wrote about the Bildungsroman. If you're curious, you can read those notes later. I think I won't bring it up now, but some really interesting stuff about like the redefining of identity or the loss of identity in this case. So you can read those later.
I really like that moment as well, because she comes into the movie very much the sort of hopeful rookie. I want to do this because I want to make a difference, and DREDD sort of already looks at her and says, "Yeah, we'll see how you feel about that at the end of the day." And she does change. She is the only character that has an arc in the movie where she does change and grow and maintains some of the moral compass that she had before, while still being able to compromise to some extent. I think it is interesting.
I also really love that scene.
Done.
I love that scene not just because of the emotional aspects of it, which are great, but also the most clever use of her psychic abilities. She leans against the door, reads the mind of the woman, to get the name of someone she knows. I don't remember exactly what the name was, but then she says, "Hey, it's me. Can you let me in?" And so that's how they get into the room in the first place. They don't do enough with that stuff later in the movie, but that moment was really, really cool.
What about you guys, Josh and Grizz? Do you have any favorite scenes?
Yeah. I think these two scenes happen simultaneously, but the scene where Anderson gets the best of Kay with like their mind games, and he tries to use his gun on her gun on her, and also when DREDD is kind of being stalked by the three corrupt judges in that whole sequence. Those two things happening were awesome. Both of them.
That might be my favorite action scene of the movie because it's the first time that he's challenged. Like throughout the movie, he's just like this machine, and he's just killed everyone with no problem. And
he has to get bailed out too.
Yeah, it's good, really good.
Just on that scene, I love when he's like hiding behind cover and he's going through all the ammo on his gun, and all of it's out of ammo. And then he gets to the last high X. It's the last shot. Boom.
Yeah, that's cool.
My favorite scene in the movie is when Anderson is using her psychic abilities to interrogate Kay, and he starts like, well, we're in my head, so I can do whatever I want. He tries to shoot her, nothing happens, and I just thought that whole sequence was really cool, and it was that cool surreal vibe. And then I also like the scene because it's a scene where Kay is really trying to mess with Anderson. But Anderson keeps her cool and keeps control of the situation and ultimately wins by messing with his brain so much that he pisses himself. That was really, really cool scene. Very powerful moment for Anderson as a character.
So yeah, a lot of great moments. How do we feel about the ending overall of the movie? I think I already gave my thoughts on it. I think the epilogue specifically sort of elevates the movie because it shows Dredd as this character that is very stern and stoic but doesn't always have to stick to all the rules 100% if his judgment is better than them in some moments.
Is that problematic though?
I don't know. It depends how you look at it because I agree that it's an interesting conversation because the world is very much setting up that the judges themselves are a problem because they dispense judgment so quickly and they have so much discretionary power and you don't know how much they get it right. And the movie itself shows you the corrupt judges that, for money will do anything. Yeah. So I feel like in this world, him sort of using his better judgment against what the letter of the law is a positive, but it's such a broken system that even the positive is kind of a negative.
I like the epilogue, but I think that the ending where he throws Mama over the edge, while it looks really cool, it seems like an awful big risk for a character who we've established as such a strict follower of the rules to risk blowing up an entire building full of innocent people. It's a cool moment, but it does feel a little out of character for me.
I don't know, I feel like at that point he's been shot, he's been through the ringer, and he's like, I just want to end this, and if I die doing it, I'll be dead anyway. It doesn't matter.
Well, if I die doing it, sure.
75,000 people.
75,000 other people. That's what I'm saying.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't think he's been established as a character that has too much regard for human life. Like, if he has to kill, he'll do it easily.
Well, that's not a good thing then.
No, it's not. I'm not saying it's a good thing. Thing.
Was there a mechanism in her watch thing that, I get it if her heart stops beating, the detonators go off. Is there anything about it that, if she leaves the building, if he leaves the premises, could he take her in, is what I'm asking?
I feel like he could, but he goes, the sentence is death. And I think the one thing that's consistent about him is when he delivers a sentence, he's going to carry it out.
Yeah, well, I mean, he could have delivered the sentence,
that is
a couple
true.
miles away.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
That's a good point.
If the range doesn't go up 50 stories, well, why not take the risk and just take her 10 miles away and then do it?
That's true, but then we don't have a cool over-the-top ending to the movie.
Yeah.
Okay, so just go to another one of the mega buildings.
Yeah.
And throw her off that
one.
It's too much work, Jeff.
He's got, they only respond to 6%. He's got work to do.
They only respond to 6% because they're all driving people to other buildings to throw them off.
That could be. Wow. Okay. So before we rank, do we have any final thoughts on the movie? Go ahead, Christian.
Yeah, how different would the movie be if when when Mama is getting thrown off, if you threw in "What's Up, Danger" from the Miles Morales?
Yep, completely different vibe.
I did see something on Twitter the last few days that someone said you could improve any movie by adding Spider-Man, and so people were sarcastically adding him into really sad, inappropriate movies, and that's I mean, I think that would work actually amazingly right there. If you put Miles Morales next to Lena Headey as she's falling, perfect. I love it already.
Amazing.
So, final thoughts on the movie.
Final thoughts? Yep.
I like it. It is the kind of movie, like I said before, that I could watch again and again and again. But it is not going to be the kind of movie that I'm ever like, yeah, this was a philosophical masterpiece or anything like that. It's a cool action film for me.
Yeah, same. 2012 was cool. Good movie. I'm bummed it took me 9 years, but there's a lot of stuff in 2012 I was seeing instead. But yeah, good movie.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I agree. It's a cool action movie, and I love cool action movies. And I feel like this movie being sort of contemporary with the Raid and pre-John Wick, I feel like it gets overlooked a little bit compared to those movies, but I really, really like it.
I also was thinking about John Wick because I was watching this. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Christian?
I love that it's like a modern B movie though. Like I think taking it any further than just kind of the, like Jeff said, like kind of the action surface level stuff, you'll run into some trouble probably. But otherwise, if you're just in it for a good time, enjoy some aesthetics, some hyper stylization, it's a good time. Great movie.
I agree with you, but it's tough to spend $45 million making a B movie. It's tough beat
That's
for
Very
studio.
good point.
That's true.
We mentioned The Raid quite a few times. The Raid came out in 2011, and you guys are always much more knowledgeable about movie production than I am. What are the chances that while they were making this movie that they knew about The Raid? Because they
probably knew about it.
You think so? I was going to say, because it could have been possible they might have had some overlap in production time. But
so the conceit of the movie is like this building, and I was just reading the Wikipedia page that Alex Garland apparently was working on the script in like 2008. So it had been in the works for a while. Granted, they would probably know that movie is being made as they were making this, at least in production, but they also decided on the aesthetic and the conceit long before that.
Yeah.
So
watch The Raid.
Yeah, great movie. Okay, so let's get to our ranking. Let's start with Christian. You don't have a vote here. I'm sorry, because this is not a democracy, unfortunately.
But you do get to share your opinion.
You do get to give us your opinion on where you would put it based on our list, which is, I'm sure, is
I refuse to rank DREDD with this list. I will not do it. I'll say it's probably not a top tier movie. I would try to persuade you that it's maybe somewhere in the middle. Otherwise, good luck, guys. Please don't let me down.
Right. Okay. Who wants to start?
I'll go first. I do what I always do. I think, do I like this better than The Matrix Reloaded? And then I that's where I start from. So, and ironically, no, I actually like Matrix Reloaded a little better than DREDD. So for me, I put it at our 32 spot, just after The Matrix Reloaded.
Okay, do I like this better than The Matrix Reloaded is a loaded question, because I don't. But what movies don't I like better than The Matrix? You know what I mean? Based on the list, I would actually go the other way around, funnily enough, because I would put it around number 23, so below Ensemble D.
He goes to, do I like it better than Rudy?
Yeah, that's the cutoff point.
And he's like, yes, I do like it better than Rudy.
I feel like I might even put it at 21, just because or even 20, to be honest, because I do feel like I enjoy this movie more than Bicycle Thieves, but I don't know, putting it above Ensemble feels
enjoy a movie more than the incredibly sad Bicycle Thieves. Well, yeah, no, of course.
You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Come on. Putting it above Ensemble feels a little weird, so I would go at number.
You're not going to do our guy Denis wrong.
No.
Yeah, thank you,
after
Hugo.
Dune, after he gave us Dune.
After he gave us Dune, Hugo.
Not even, and especially not with Christian on the podcast. It's like, yeah, can't do that.
Okay, so that's where Hugo's got it. Where do you got it, Josh?
I've started to just like go from the top down because I feel like that's more interesting. So I'm like overvaluing a lot of movies because, you know, I don't like this more than Mank. I don't like this more than Chicago 7, but I don't know. I'll just go from the top down and just keep going down until I find a movie that I don't think is better than. And so that takes me to, that for me, it puts it after 127 hours, ahead of Batman Mask of the Phantasm. So at 25 for me. So if Hugo has it at 23, if I have it at 25, and Grizz has it at 32, that averages out to about 27?
Yes.
So do you want to put this...
26.666 repeating.
So after on Her Majesty's Secret Service and ahead of Chef, is that about right?
That is where it would average out to.
Okay.
Sorry, Jon Favreau.
Lock it in. Yeah.
Sorry, Jon Favreau. Yeah, we love you though.
I do.
So there you have it. That's our list.
Oh yeah.
Just to give you an idea of where it is on the list, the movies immediately above it are. We have Dredd at 27, 26 is On Her Majesty's Secret Service, 25 is Batman Mask of the Phantasm, 24 is 127 Hours, 23 is Rudy, 22 is Unsung D, 21 is Jackie Brown, 20 is Bicycle Thieves. I won't go through the whole list because that'll take me an hour. Anyway, what are we talking about next week?
Grizz?
Well, it was my turn to pick, and so next week we are talking about what I consider a vastly underrated and overlooked movie, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, directed by one... I started to say Steven Spielberg. I don't know why I started to say that. Ben Stiller. Directed by Ben Stiller.
Sure.
And starring
That
Ben
would be a
Stiller.
surprise.
That would be a surprise, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a really great film, another feel-good sort of story, in my opinion, and I think you guys are going to really enjoy that.
Feel good like Dredd.
Feel good like Dredd.
Oh
yeah.
man.
I hope there's slow-mo falling from buildings, or I won't watch this. Oh, that's fun. Anyway, Christian, thanks for coming on the show. We hope to have you again if you want to do another movie. Where can people find you and your stuff?
On Tinder, swipe right. Otherwise, on Twitter, I am at IsoChristian. Usually I'm retweeting stuff from my alt accounts. Case in point, Large Popcorn, where I do a movie podcast every week. Some big changes ahead, so look forward to that. I'm also on the Penultimate Conquest. I'm streaming Extra Life stuff later today. It's also where I do video essays on various subjects there, so you can check those out. And I also do a weekly gaming podcast, Podcast PXN, every single Wednesday.
And that's also with the Penultimate Conquest people, right?
No.
Well, that's a new thing. That's a different thing.
That's a different thing. Yeah.
Christian is a very busy man, and follow him on Twitch as well. If you're watching us on Twitch, and if you haven't already followed him on Twitch, you should do that.
I do too many things.
The Twitch gets weird. We're just saying it's great, but come in with the right expectations. Grizz, Josh, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at GoodGameGrizz, on Twitch at GoodGameGrizz, and on letterboxd at GoodGameGrizz. And I did just recently start doing a new show with a friend of mine, Jennifer Van Damsel. She's a professional cosplayer and model, and and she just started her YouTube channel, so you can find her channel. It's Jennifer Van Damsel on YouTube. We just started doing a show called If You Ask Me, and we talk about movies and TV shows and comic books and video games and all that sort of stuff, and share our opinions on those things. So you should check that out.
Fun. Cool. You can find me on Twitter at the Sloop Josh B, new handle, trying it out, and on YouTube, movies I love and so can you. And I've been talking about a birdcage video for a while that I'm working on. That's basically done. It's 58 minutes long. I'm currently it's not out yet because I'm currently getting feedback from past feature guest in front of the show, TJ Keeley. He's giving me notes on an early
legitimately is the smartest person we've ever had on the show.
That is incredibly true. Yeah.
So hopefully he can use his smarts to improve my birdcage video. So watch that when it comes out. In the meantime, watch the Birdcage on HBO Max. And hit me up.
And you can find me at Hugo_Pinay on Twitter, and you can find me at Hugo Pinay on Letterboxd. Also, follow the podcast at RTF_pod. Don't follow RTF Pod, our sworn enemies. We also put up a sort of a...
I wonder if they even have the slightest idea that we hate them.
I mean, I hope they do.
Absolutely
honestly.
not. I don't think they've tweeted in the last 5 years.
God, I want to track them down.
You should create Twitter beef.
Yeah, I want to track them down. I'm not going to lie. But also, we put up on the YouTube channel for Remember the Film. We put up my our review for Eternals, even though Grizz hadn't seen the movie yet. But I saw the premiere
I hosted
early in Rome, and he hosted. So it's a fun little conversation. So if you want to have some thoughts about Eternals, you can watch that on the YouTube channel as well. Other than that, see you next week with The Secret Life of Walter Mitty's Pets. Sorry, that was bad. Bye, everyone.